I'm not trying to start a fight, honest. I'm actually trying to prevent them with today's topic on the MTOM podcast. I'm Paul Yeager. This is a production of the Market to Market TV show. We know that people who watch the show are multi-generational. Some are on the farm, some are off. Some have been there. And if you're watching, chances are you have interest in what's going to happen to whether it's the land, the buildings, the memories, the history, and you're trying to prevent paying taxes. Let's be honest. That's really what a lot of this is. It boils down to financials for some people. What is your plan? Have you made an estate plan? Have you talked about succession? They are not one and the same. They are related. They're cousins, and they need to be put together sooner rather than later. Who's leading the charge? You're going to be surprised what Mike Downey tells you today, because it is from a generation you wouldn't think is the one that's doing the leading. So Mike is back with us here on the MTOM podcast. He is the manager of succession planning for Uncommon Farm, and we are going to talk about a lot of things when it comes to succession planning, estate planning, some scenarios. If you think I have talked about your specific scenario, that is purely a coincidence and not any exact story mentioned. Just get that disclaimer in there. New episodes come out each and every Tuesday. Let's get to our discussion with Mike. There's a new way to stay connected and know what's happening with Market to Market when you subscribe to Market Insider. One email and a lot of information awaits you. Go to markettomarket.org and subscribe to Market Insider. Mike, it has been a while since we last chatted. Has this whole problem been fixed? Everybody has everything signed, sealed, delivered, and communicated what they want on their wishes for their farm?
I wish I could say that, Paul, but I think you know my answer there. It's still an issue out there. I would say, if anything, it's been more of a limelight issue for folks. You know, even recently heard a political panel and economists that typically talk about different issues, but when they're asked about, you know, what do you see that could threaten family farms and agriculture, it's ironic how much you hear about, you know, secession in the industry.
Have we at least made progress on the issue?
I would like to say that, you know, certainly it's interesting what motivates progress and people to do planning. And there's that old adage, there's two certainties in life, death and taxes, right? But ironically, one motivates farmers to do some planning more than the other. But I get it. You know, farming is a different animal to talk about. It's not just a job or an occupation for many. It's a livelihood and identity. But I do think as we look at the demographics are trending continually one way, and that's in general, farmers and landowners are probably the oldest we've seen in history. So I think more and more are getting it, that we need to figure something out.
Let's go back to the beginning of that answer. Death and taxes. In this issue, the two are tied together. Let's start then with your first answer. You mentioned politically. Any assistance coming from the government here right now since we last chatted a couple of years ago on this issue?
Yeah, I was just at our summer conference last week in Des Moines, and we had some political folks there doing a panel. And obviously we have the new, you know, big, beautiful bill, you know, so we were getting all updated on that. There are some new programs and funds out there to benefit beginning and young farmers. And so I think that certainly even at those conversations at the political level, obviously is something that they've been talking about.
Do we get the sense that will, I won't say force the hand, but maybe open up discussions from an older generation to put something on paper now that maybe that basis has changed, the step up in basis?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, that's a good question. I think probably more so than even that, Paul, is you know, there was going to be a tax sunset at the end of this year that did not come to fruition. The estate tax exemptions were actually made permanent. So ironically, I first was exposed to succession planning back in 2010 and 11, leading up to another significant tax event that was going to occur in 2012. So I'm a little concerned that since exemptions have been made permanent and the estate tax concern quite isn't there anymore, that maybe that'll prompt people that, oh, we don't need to, you know, worry about this. We can worry about this later and so forth. But I just look at it, succession means so many other things than just tax planning after death, about transition now with day-to-day farms and getting that next gen involved.
I guess before I go negative, Mike, I'll just walk me through what a perfect succession plan looks like.
That's ironically a question that I often ask the folks that I'm meeting with is, what does an ideal outcome look like for you? Because that could be different for everybody. But our definition that we like to use or offer is, it's not just about a successful transition of assets, but also kind of what our long-term vision is, values, the business continuity, keeping the business together, the day-to-day leadership and management, to put that all together along with a good estate plan. Because there's a distinction between estate planning and succession planning. Estate planning is just one component of that, but put that all together, I think that's when you can create a legacy and something that you can pass along to the next generation.
Well, okay, so estate planning. But yes, they're different, but the two have to kind of go together, right? They're not mutually exclusive. They are bound together.
I would say estate planning, I like to, and I spent a lot of time on this. Actually, it's a big one at the top of my list as far as what are the common traits of farms that do successfully transition. On the top of the list is they know that there's a distinction between estate planning and succession. They truly focus on succession first, then the tax part of it, the estate planning. And so those that understand that difference, that estate is just kind of one component of that. But again, a lot of folks I meet with have an estate plan. I think they're in pretty good shape, but when I actually play that out, what is a perfect outcome for you, it's surprising how many times those two don't complement one another.
Why is that?
Again, I think as a general rule, our industry, because of our tax laws, getting a step up in basis that promotes after death transfers. And sometimes folks just don't think through, okay, what's that going to look like for the next generation? And maybe there's some things that we should be transitioning today. That's an important part to keep the day-to-day operations going. And then the intangible non-asset pieces, just training and educating the next gen on just how to continue to manage this farm moving forward.
And is there ever too early of a time to have that conversation?
I guess the boilerplate answer to that, or the cliche, is you never can start soon enough. But I just was asked that last week. Their children are in high school, and they're going to start that conversation now on how they're going to communicate to their kids on what it looks like to come back to the farm. Do you need to go work a few years off the farm after school before you come back and bring some experiences back with you, or can you just come back right away? After school compensation and decision making, all of these are things that you can't really start soon enough to communicate, so everybody kind of knows what they're planning for.
If there's someone with a child in high school or children in high school, they might be in their 40s, let's say. If they have not, what would be the percentage of people do you think are willing to have that conversation when the older generation is in their 40s and the younger generation's in high school?
I would say higher than you believe, because I'll go a generation ahead. To the generation ahead of the 40s are in their 70s and 80s and 90s, and that generation, as a general rule, is maybe more kept things to the chest, if you will, and didn't communicate the best, the future plans. And because people are living longer and able to enjoy what they do, farming longer, sometimes that delays that. And those folks in the 40 and 50 year generation, are still working with their folks on the farm. And sometimes that impacts them and what they want to do with their kids, that they kind of do it the other way around, where they'll actually communicate more than maybe the generation before us did.
I wasn't trying to out them, but that's where I was going. That clearly can be someone north of 60 holds on and holds on. Have you seen that change at all in your time doing this, Mike?
Yeah, one of my first families, I tell this story a lot. The call was from a 70-year-old, and he was ready to do some planning, and that's pretty normal, pretty typical. But in walking with him when we made that appointment was his father, 92 years old. Extreme example, but a true example. They were still, in shares, working together on the farm, and but really by the end of that conversation, the 70-year-old was more interested in how to get his kids in their 30s and 40s involved. So I think that's what you see. One generation can impact the next on how they might communicate and handle things with the kids below them.
Let's keep the names out of it, of course. But what's been the worst case scenario of someone who's maybe in their 80s and 90s that passes away before anything happens? What's your scare us straight story that you've had to deal with?
Probably could have a whole nother session on this, Paul, but I guess what scares me the most, I mentioned this before, is that when that estate plan plays out, does that really complement what they wanted to have done? And if we let time and appreciated farmland values and equipment values pass us by, we've lost that opportunity to structure the way that things to, hopefully give the farm the best position possible to continue forward. But you'll be surprised how many times that isn't the case when assets are just equally divided among the heirs, and we have some farming heirs on the farm and off the farm heirs, or we're dividing up the family farm. Can we continue to do that? Can we continue to have every farm pay for the same farm at every generation? And, that's, I was just meeting with some folks yesterday that was very, kind of on top of their list, is we don't want to see our kids have to buy the farm again, just like we did from our siblings. And it really impacted our ability to grow and expand the operation.
Well, what's the percentage of people that have no plan and they just, whatever happens when they pass, it happens?
If I go off the studies that have done, even here in the state of Iowa, which I think would be similar across the country, is that I think only 20 to 30% of farms actually have a written succession plan that they've sat down and really thought it out. And, a lot of folks have wills and, things that, distribute assets, but truly not having a written plan, to pass that farm to the next generation. So, again, an interesting phenomenon I've often thought about, Paul, because I don't think I've ever met a farmer that's told me they don't want to see the farm go to the next generation and stay in the family, but it's such a difficult subject for a lot of them to even talk about.
Well, yes, because in our experience and having this discussion here, both you and me and other people, is there is a reluctance for those trying to how to best equally or equitably share on and off the farm. There's someone who has stayed behind to work on the farm, and there's those who have left the flock. In the rules, you would think of most families, you're supposed to get the same thing from both of those in the eyes of the law, right? And so what is the apprehension then that some of those that 80% or 70% who've not put anything down on paper, the reluctance to do something?
Yeah, that fair and equal term, it's, that is something that's up on the top of that list I mentioned before. Those that are doing it and experiencing success, they roll their sleeves up and they figure that out. Instead of avoiding it like a lot of folks do. And but I would say really understanding what your numbers are, especially with everything that's happened with our farm values here in the last 10 or 15 years, but balancing that family harmony piece or that perceived discounted inheritance, if we apply discounts to family assets, balancing that versus how strong do we feel that the farm is in a position to continue to be financially feasible, ability to continue the farm forward. And that looks different for every family, every situation, but there's some give and take. We're not going to probably get everything perfect, but finding that balance that there's, everybody in the family feels like they've been treated fairly, but also in a way that the farm could continue forward.
Is it better when a family member who's that older generation makes that choice, or does it end up being better if the court makes the choice?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that older generation, I mean, one of my favorite meetings is a meeting with the family where we just lay it out on the table to everybody right now, almost like a reading the will, where the kids can all hear it from mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, and opportunity to ask questions. And but the folks that do that, the chances of having issues in the family later just significantly are reduced, as you can imagine. So yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure that we control our own destiny and not put that into the court's hands.
I'm not really sure it's a study or if it's available for data for you to pull, but what has been a common, fair, and equitable discussion about those who are on and off the farm and what they are, I won't say entitled to, but factored in this discussion?
Sure, it's a lot different than splitting up an estate for someone that doesn't have a lot of farm assets. It's just a lot of liquid assets. It's pretty easy to split that up pretty equally. That's a different discussion on the farm where a lot of the equity and net worth is in assets, not necessarily liquid, cash assets. And so, number one, making that distinction between what those assets are on the farm that are an important part for those that are continuing the farm forward, that for them to control. Just like mom and dad have needed to use a building site or grain bins and equipment, it's probably best to transition those in the farm, on the farm active, versus having that all split up between all the kids. So that's an excellent place to start, is just thinking about your assets and what makes sense for family to share in versus those that maybe it doesn't so much.
And there are times, though, when either there's still a note on that bin site or that building when something happens and a transition needs to be and something needs to be paid. Sometimes it's not all profit. There's debt that has to be settled too.
There is, yeah. Not everybody realizes that debts can be part of an estate plan too, and how are we going to handle that? And maybe it's best if we have some really good long-term debt secured to not pay that off from the liquidity from the estate, and just have that carry forward to the next generation. But yeah, I mean, that's a excellent point you make. The difference of inheriting cash, they're just pure cash, no debt, versus inheriting farm assets. There might be some liabilities attached to it.
Which scenario is harder to navigate? The 4 that are off the farm, or the 2 that stay on the farm and 2 that have left the farm?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I've seen that go both ways. Actually, the whole talking about fair pay and sweat equity and future inheritance and all these things. So I think it's just a matter of really understanding what's going to happen. Because of our estate tax rules, everything's going to get valued for its fair market value for estate tax purposes. But that isn't necessarily the way that we have to establish our family value. So almost having a process to value a family market value, which oftentimes looks a lot different than the fair going rate, because as a general rule, families I work with don't expect those in the family that want to keep this together to pay the same price a neighbor would have to, or somebody outside of the community. So really getting our handles. I spend a lot of time on this understand your numbers, and that resonates well for me too, because my dad and uncle farmed together for many years, and they had a corporation that was established for tax reasons, but maybe not a whole lot of thought long term about the succession of the farm. So.
Well, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's actually the next thing I wanted to cover. So it's easy when it's 4 kids, but what if it is, it's your dad's brother or sister, and then you have your dad's kids, and they're the uncle and the niece, and you start getting all this mix together, and it's not as clean and easy. What's a good way to try to navigate that?
Yeah, and if you have a plan that would call maybe more standard or boilerplate, each generation gets involved, it gets a little bit more removed from the farm, and more chance that people want to exit. But that's where I would really think about what is the process for folks to enter and exit each generation. and really understanding what that equity looks like. If there's going to be folks buying out, sometimes it's inevitable that we're going to be buying out other family members, siblings, cousins, extended, whatever the case is, but making sure we understand what those are and what that looks like, how it will impact the farm. So having kind of that ebb and flow, if you will, for folks. Usually where you don't have that in a good, clear process, that's where the potential for conflict obviously can occur.
Well, let's more my area growing up, we had families of 11 and 12 kids. And when you get 2 or 3 generations removed from that, and maybe there wasn't enough to spread out and split, but when you start having larger numbers, does that usually mean larger problems, or is that an easier discussion just because the math doesn't work, and instead of it being 100,000, it's $100 because you have 15 brothers and sisters?
I don't know if it necessarily is a numbers game, so forth, as just the personalities within that family, and maybe what's been communicated and as they were raised on the farm and what their sentimental value is. And I don't know that I can really think of it just because we have more people in the family, that means we have a lot more conflict. I think it's really more of a situation from one to the next. And, and obviously you throw in some in-laws and extended family and other folk, respected advisors or whatever that might be, that, that can also add to the mix too.
Because there's going to be those that have taken more of a role in the executor of an estate than maybe the other sibling, and the other kids are more involved. And so, yeah, it can get messy, I would think.
Yeah, and I feel like even families that do get along, something happens when mom and dad aren't here anymore. It's probably somebody in the family, something's going to change. The flip's going to switch a bit, and at some point someone's going to understand what their value of their inheritance is, and they're going to compare that to what their return is from their share of the income from the rent or the farm or whatever the case. Somebody's going to make that comparison at some point. So being ahead of that, so we, again, it looks different for every family, balancing that family harmony, what that inheritance looks like versus the financial feasibility for the farm to keep it going. So.
All right, we talked about the older generation. I want to go back to the younger generation for a minute, if I could. If I'm somebody who's fits into this puzzle some way, somehow, and I don't see anything on paper or know if anything has been put on paper for either an estate or a succession plan, how do I best exhibit and communicate my desires, wishes, and for something to get done? Let's just say it's back to someone in their 20s.
That's a question I get often. I don't know that I have a perfect answer, because I totally get it. Because sometimes if you're in that generation, you don't want to offend that generation ahead of you. You want to try to do it away and respectfully. I mean, when you look at agriculture in general, we sort of have 2 generations. We have the one generation, mom and dad ahead of us, that own all the equity and have all the cash flow, and they know they need to do something. They're just not sure what to do. And then basically there's everybody else looking for opportunity, whether you're in your 20s or 40s or 50s for that matter. And they have, not as much cash flow and equity, and they too know they need to do something. They're just not sure what. But having some sort of common denominator to start that conversation, sometimes that's the most difficult. Let's just get the conversation started, and then take it from there.
So if I'm the 25-year-old who sees my uncle as a problem of not dealing with this, and my dad is not having that discussion and he's buried his head in the sand, I mean, how do I not get kicked out just wanting to have the conversation?
Yeah, and I've seen also that there's been maybe some ultimatums given, like, hey, you guys need to figure this out or I'm out. That's one approach. I'm not saying that's the best approach. But I think everybody can think of a situation in their neighborhood with neighbors in the community where it didn't go well. But whatever the push button is, sometimes this is a psychology game too. What are those push buttons to help get someone started? Is it, keeping the family farm going? Is it taxes, fear of taxes, whatever the case may be? sometimes those in the 20s getting married, Paul, have motivated mom and dad to do planning because, the kids just got married. We better do some planning now. That can go the other way around too, where I've seen mom and dad willingly want to pass the farm, and the kids understand that maybe there's some concerns with dad or the financial being of the farm, and like, mom and dad, you need to get your financial house in order before we're even interested. So,
Because I've seen it go south where a new in-law comes in and then a divorce happens and there's not been a clean setup of that person's not entitled to, they can make a claim. Or, I mean, that can be a factor, right? I mean, we're talking divorce. That's one thing. Then you have, what if you have two farm families and those two houses are nowhere near in order or the same? Those are kind of, I'm guessing, dicey waters to navigate too.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. The financial piece is so important that, I get it. I grew up on a farm. I still help on a small family farm. I like to go out there and run the equipment, work in the business, not necessarily always on the business. But with everything at risk today with family farms and the dollars changing hands and all of these risk factors, a lot of them that you talk about on your shows, that's, I think it's probably more and more important to stay on top of all those things than not.
Mike, you've had conversations with people individually. You've also done larger sessions. What did you just do recently in Des Moines that you were trying to accomplish?
Just had a 1-day in person last week in Des Moines, full day workshop where I'll do, maybe shorter 2 or 3 hour talks or part of another ag organization's customer meeting. This is the opportunity for folks to come in and actually work on their own situation. And we maybe go through some examples and then we hit the timeout button. Hey, let's spend 15 minutes, you and your family, thinking about what we just talked about, and then apply that to your own situation. And sometimes the feedback we get is just for us to get away from the farm, from our element, from all of our day-to-day distractions, to focus as a farm and a family on this is, for some folks, that's valuable for them to do that, to get out of their element.
Nothing like a good hotel ballroom or an office park to take you off your game a little bit.
Sure. As you know, it doesn't hurt to offer some lunch and
Yeah.
some social piece of it too. And I hear a lot, farms like to hear from other farms, not just from succession planners like myself, but, bring in a panel of other farms and share their experiences and, what advice they might leave everybody else to think about.
For that session, specifically the one last week, you were getting multiple people from a family to join, or was it just one person from that family and you hoped they had the conversation with someone else back on the farm?
I think it's most impactful for multiple generations to be there. Absolutely. I mean, we did have some that wasn't, not everybody's able to make it. So maybe just one generation was represented or two, but certainly having more there is I think a lot more impactful than not.
Do you find that there was someone in those rooms reluctant to be there?
Yeah, I mean, that's, this is a subject that's pretty, sensitive, personal. Sometimes it takes some to warm up more than others. And obviously you got to find that balance, because I think when it comes right down to it, I feel like I thrive the best just one-on-one with the family, sitting across the table, but sometimes offering just some good information for people to get their thought process started for their own situation, and hearing from some others is helpful for them. But yeah, certainly I think it's kind of a mixed approach for everybody. Everybody might prefer that a little differently, but as a general rule, farmers are maybe a little bit more private in nature. So.
What? Since when? I know all loudmouth farmers, all of them. Not one wants to be reserved, quiet, and not say anything about what's personally going on in their finances. That's all of them. if only the case. Okay, Mike. So if I'm watching this, listening to this, whatever, and I know I need to have that conversation with my elder, where do I start?
Well, I mean, don't take for granted, you know, that your elder isn't aware that you want to have that conversation, because I've seen that happen too, where um, elder can say, "Well, I didn't even know that was so important to them." If they'd only just let us know. So I think really finding that opportunity. Everybody has different personality and communication styles and push buttons, like I mentioned before. What those are just to make sure that they understand that you'd love to have that conversation, and because that impacts at the end of the day and the future of the farm and the planning for the next generation, to help them do some planning when they know what the plan is for the generation ahead of them. So.
And you can start with, I'm guessing, I want to carry out your wishes. That elder has earned that, I would think.
I would, yeah, for sure. And, especially you see that with multi-generational assets and family farms, that legacy and that heritage piece. Legacy doesn't have to be always about a physical farm, the land itself. It can be about memories, and I that's one thing I really encourage folks. Actually at the workshop last week, one of the exercises we did was sketch out the key events of your farm that have helped lead you to where you are today. Because you'll be surprised. That's a very simple elementary exercise, but you'll be surprised how many times that history isn't carried forward. And once that kind of gets lost in translation from one generation to the next, it's, that potentially is lost forever.
What is my next opportunity to have a group session with you, Mike?
Well, if you want to travel down to south with me, actually here in a couple weeks, August 12th, I'm going to be doing a similar session down in Amarillo, Texas. We work with a group of farms down in the Panhandle. So we're actually having a peer group of farms that we work with that are gathering down there, and I'm just coming down a day ahead of that to offer this workshop. But we'll be offering others here later this year and this winter. We have several in the works, some in collaboration with some other groups as well. And so obviously you can always follow us on our website, where we have all of those events posted.
And which website is that again?
uncommonfarms.com. That's I lead out the succession planning efforts. Uncommon Farms is a farmer-based organization that just works with farms across the country, North America, just on not just succession, but kind of a lot of these other areas we talked about today, Paul, the financial piece and the people, and just helping farms kind of stay on track, whatever those goals are. So,
I appreciate the time. Good to see you again, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
My thanks to Mike from Uncommon Farms. It's not uncommon to be in this situation. So go back, share this one with someone that you want to have that discussion, or go look for any of our past episodes. We'll talk to you next time. New episodes every Tuesday. If you have a comment, would love to hear what's on your mind, or send me an email, market2market@iowapbs.org. See you next time.